Well, we've heard a lot about this movie, but we haven't seen it. Of course, Sony has decided to pull the controversial, much hype movie, The Interview. We've got a bit of a news story here, just kind of recapping all that has happened over the past couple of weeks.
Sony is no longer standing by its controversial film about North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, The Interview. This after the largest theater chains in the U.S. backed out of showing the film, and the New York premiere of the movie canceled.
I cannot think of another moment like this in modern movie history. Usually the deals that are struck between studios and theater operators are ironclad. Once the operators agree to put their movie on all their screens, they've got to stick by that deal. But this is an unprecedented situation.
Today, the State Department confirmed an Assistant Secretary of State did have a routine conversation with Sony executives, but said they do not weigh in on Hollywood productions.
We're not in the business of signing off on content of movies or things along those lines.
The film is believed to be the impetus for a devastating hack on Sony's computer system and a new threat purportedly from the hackers, promising a bitter fate for moviegoers of the film. U.S. officials with first-hand knowledge tell CNN North Korea remains the prime suspect in the hack, but so far the U.S. government hasn't publicly pointed the finger at the reclusive country.
The only way that we will stop them is if they are persuaded that this was a bad idea. And so we have got to react in a way that deters future attacks of this kind.
Well, did the terrorists win? Did Sony back down to threats from North Korea? To join me to break this all down in studio, we have Chris Kim, and that's with Handvoice. It's an organization advocating human rights in North Korea as well as refugee status for North Koreans here in Canada. And joining me via Skype is Bruce Klinger, who's with the Heritage Foundation. Thanks so much for both of you joining me. So that's the big question. Did Sony cave? Have the terrorists won? I'm going to go to you, Bruce, first of all, with the Heritage Foundation. What's your take on this?
Well, right now we're still waiting for official U.S. government confirmation that North Korea is behind it. We've seen media reports that U.S. intelligence officials assess that North Korea, the government itself, is behind it, and that the White House is debating whether to make that public. So we're still waiting on that. Presuming the government itself is behind it, it certainly shows a reflection of North Korea's capabilities to do such an attack, as well as a continuation of its previous threats against other South Korean media organizations and businesses when they feel that the leadership itself has been insulted.
Yeah, and we've heard from the White House today that, of course, President Obama is being briefed on the latest details about this cyber attack. Christopher, what do you think that it says when Sony decides to pull the plug on airing this movie called, it's supposed to be satirical, The Interview, very much in the same light as everyone remembers Team America. Right. Does this really heighten the power and clout of the dictator in North Korea?
I think to some extent, sure, the public will certainly be paying more attention to the threats. I think that the fact that the White House as well as Sony has their ears perked because of these threats, it just goes to show that the North Korea government, might have a trick or two up its sleeves. But I think ultimately this might backfire for the North Korean government in that more attention is being brought to this movie than ever before. Mm-hmm. And from a human rights perspective, I think that's precisely what we want media to do, is to bring to light the issues that are going on in North Korea right now.
Yeah, and I'll ask you, Bruce, because, North Korea is often the butt of many jokes, but I think that this particular issue and this news story really does kind of heighten the question amongst the public and security officials at large. What are their capabilities? Maybe we shouldn't just be pointing the finger and laughing, that actually we should be taking a little bit more serious look at the capabilities of North Korea in that regime.
Right. North Korea's very bombastic propaganda and rhetoric sort of opens itself for ridicule. But we really can't ignore the threats. There's a growing nuclear weapon and missile capabilities. They have a million-man army that's forward deployed near the border with South Korea. Their military capabilities with regards to nuclear and missile are growing. They already can threaten South Korea and Japan with nuclear weapons, and they're gaining the ability to be able to reach the United States. Mm-hmm. This kind of cyber attack is seemingly silly because of the movie, but it also reflects the capabilities for far more serious cyber attacks against infrastructure, against military targets, against U.S. intelligence and satellite systems, which we rely on so heavily during any kind of conflict with North Korea. So, it may seem silly on the surface because it's a movie, but it does reflect their capabilities.
Yeah, and Chris, it is kind of this, you hear of North Korea, there's flare-ups every, maybe once a year or twice a year where they're kind of put on the map, and the world turns their attention to the awful plight of North Korean people that live in such oppressive conditions. And North Korea was blamed for the attack on the South Korean, I believe it was a news agency just last year. And now there's kind of details coming out about the type of spyware or malware that was used in the Sony attacks, and it was written in Korean, which is a very unique language. As you know, it's a relatively new alphabet, new language, and it's not often one that they see in cyber attacks. So it looks like all kinds of signs are pointing back to North Korea, even though the North Korean regime has said that the allegations are actually false.
Right, and that could very well, be the case where there are supporters of the North Korean regime, sympathizers, if you will, that are, performing these attacks. I mean, there's been no formal allegation against North Korea yet. The North Korean government hasn't actually come out and said and claimed responsibility for such actions, but you do wonder if there's some backroom chatter between the North Korean government and whoever these sympathizers are that are provoking and performing these attacks.
Yeah, and I think that symbolism of attacking, an American, big company like Sony and, Hollywood in particular shouldn't be lost. It's basically to show a sign that nowhere is safe. We can hit at the heart of your culture. And Bruce, let me ask you, there is some suggestion that perhaps the attack didn't actually come from within North Korea itself. Does North Korea have many kind of satellite or espionage operations? It seems to be a rather closed country in terms of its influence, but does it have many espionage networks that are operating around, or are they just simply people that are sympathizers with the regime?
No, they, despite the image of a very technologically backward nation, they actually have very extensive cyber attack capabilities. There's estimated 3,000 what North Korea calls cyber warriors in various military and intelligence agency systems. It's assessed that this Unit 121, which may be behind this attack, they often operate outside of North Korea to make it more difficult to trace it back to them, oftentimes operating out of China, but even Southeast Asia and European nodes. So it's always hard to trace the fingerprints on a cyber attack, but apparently the U.S. government has evidence, which they at least now are thinking is much more conclusively linking to the North Korean government itself. We still have to wait for an official announcement.
So I believe we have a clip from the White House Press Secretary Josh Earnest on the cyber attack and the decision of Sony to actually pull the interview from airing on Christmas Day. If we could just go to that quickly.
This is something that's being treated as a serious national security matter. There is evidence to indicate that we have seen destructive activity with malicious intent that was initiated by a sophisticated actor. And it is being treated by those investigative agencies, both at the FBI and the Department of Justice, as seriously as you would expect.
Well, and what are the real options for the Americans to respond to this type of attack, especially if they can't prove that it was North Korea in particular? And I want to just finish with you, Chris. We don't have a lot of time, but what do you think about this particular attack? Sure, it gains a lot of attention to North Korea, but I think that, as you said, will backfire on them because it actually shines the light on the plight of North Korean people. And that's actually where I want to end this. We're all saying how this is a blow to freedom of expression, but what about the people that are living under this repression regime in North Korea? Right.
I think what's really interesting about this issue is that, Hollywood feels threatened by North Korea and the hackers. And whether there's an affiliation or not, we do feel, attacked somewhat by these hackers. But the inconveniences and the threats that we're facing is just a small slice of what the average North Korean faces on a daily basis. I mean, this is a country that is rife with chronic malnutrition, rife with human rights abuses across the board. The UN Human Rights Commission of Inquiry actually confirmed this in a report earlier this year. So I do think that it really does put things into perspective in terms of what the North Koreans do face on a daily basis.
Well, I want to thank you both for bringing us the latest on the developments with the Sony case. In the movie, The Interview, although it's satirical, is actually not for the people in North Korea that live under this dictatorship. We're going to take a quick break and look at some of the responses from actors in Hollywood. Thanks very much to Bruce and Chris.
Thank you.